Greetings and welcome. I hope everyone is enjoying Dawntrail and all the new stuff that got added with it. Since early access started, I have streamed my MSQ journey here on YouTube, and after finishing it, I really wanted to make a video and talk about it on my channel to express all of these thoughts in my head and tell you what I thought was good and bad about it. If you want the short version, I did really enjoy the story and the new fights even more, but there are definitely some points that I didn't enjoy as much, which I will be going into detail later on in this video. I will be dividing the video into shorter discussion points and try out this timestamp thing on YouTube everyone likes so much. So use those if you don't want to hear me ramble on about everything until I finally get to the part you wanted to hear about. Also note that I have my in-game voices in Japanese because I'm a filthy weeaboo that prefers the Japanese voices over the English ones. So I will be unable to speak on the English voice acting, but if you are interested to see what the Japanese voices sound like, I will be talking about that and showing some clips. I would like to add that I will not be talking about everything in the story, but rather just the points that stuck out to me as either good or bad. If you were expecting a story recap of sorts, there are probably plenty of other videos for that. These are just my thoughts and my opinions that I wanted to put out there, and if there is something that I failed to discuss in the video that you are maybe hoping to hear about, I would love to talk about it in the comments, so feel more than welcome to talk about it further there, because I love to talk about the story in this game. But without further ado, let's get into it. So I want to begin this by talking about the beginning, when we landed in Tuliolal for the first time, because I was nothing short of amazed at how good it looked with the new graphical update, and the same goes for pretty much every zone in Dawntrail. It has just been an absolute pleasure running around and exploring, looking at all the details and love that the developers put into these areas, and I have nothing but praise for them. I am aware of a few glitches and bugs regarding some aspects of the graphical update, but I have faith that little annoyances like that will be squashed out soon enough. If there is one thing I could change, however, it would be that I wish that we could both have the vendors and the market board in Solution 9, because god, I love that place. But I know that might be too much to ask. So talking about the story, we set off to Zoraal with Wuk Lamat and Erenville, along with the twins and Kryle, to help Wuk Lamat to become the next Dawn servant, while at the same time preventing other candidates that could bring harm to the continent from becoming the Dawn servant, as well as helping Kryle discover more things about her grandfather and her own past. We meet Wuk Lamat's father and the current Dawn servant, Bakool Ja Ja, and right off the bat he leaves a strong impression on us as we walk into him having a duel with Sphene, who is also there, I guess. I will get into that later. But Bakool Ja Ja is a great leader who is pretty much respected by everyone in the whole continent because of what he did in the past. Shortly after arriving, he summons us to his palace to explain the right of succession. After being told what we have to do, we set out on this journey to travel to all these different places to complete feats given to us by a representative in the region, with the end goal of finding the fabled Golden City. I have heard some criticisms about the rite of succession and how it kind of felt like an anime, or that collecting the stones for the tablets didn't make sense, but I thought it was explained well when we went to fight Bakool Ja Ja, and he told us that he had created the rite of succession because he didn't think any of his children were ready for the throne, including Wuk Lamat, which he even asks us about. The rite of succession was more a means to foster a new ruler worthy of the throne, and he even said that if someone successfully completed the rite that he felt was not worthy, he wouldn't announce a new ruler at all. So this game we were playing had a deeper meaning to it that Bakool Ja Ja wanted us to figure out, and supposedly could only figure out by playing the game according to the rules. Having the end goal of finding the Golden City also helped a lot with keeping me motivated throughout the admittedly slow start of the MSQ, even though catching alpacas and rebuilding a boat didn't seem as exciting as going to the moon or fighting a god at the edge of the universe. I was so curious about what the Golden City was and when we would find it that it kept me engaged throughout the entire thing. I did also come to appreciate the people and the cultures we saw, and I felt like it was a necessary step to know what exactly we would be fighting for after the dome appears, which I will talk about later, and when Sphene threatens to destroy everything. Now, I want to talk about the first villain of the story, because he's not the only one. I do have to say they did this guy kinda dirty. Right from the get-go, he is a complete asshole and will go out of his way to be an asshole to everyone that he thinks is inferior to him. I mean, he even treats his companions like shit when he didn't care about a serious injury one of them got after fighting and seems completely content on leaving him behind to die.
従者ごときがオイラたちの足を引っ張る気？ついてこられないなら置いていくだけだよ。悪いな、弟がこう言ってるんだ。獣の餌になりたくなけりゃ足がちぎれてでも必死についてこいや。そんな、俺は蒼潔の教えを、祝福の兄弟を信じて必死についてきたんですよ。待って、頼みます。置いていかないで。
And this point is only emphasized further as the rite of succession progresses, with his magnum opus being to release Valigarmunda from her prison for the sole purpose of delaying his opponents, giving no care about who dies as a result. And after that event, I was really convinced that this guy was rotten to the core. But no. After Wuk Lamat beat the shit out of him in a duel, we go to Mamuk and find out the reason behind his behavior was all the pressure from the villagers, the burden of being the only blessed child born after hundreds of other children died before him, and the expectation from everyone that he would be the one to be king and save his people. And this reason made perfect sense, and I really wanted to empathize for Bakool Ja Ja, but I just couldn't understand why he acted the way he did before, when all of a sudden now he's not a complete asshole to everyone and wants to help us win. Basically a complete turnaround. If he really wasn't such a bad person, then I feel like he could have shown a little more empathy or hesitation in his actions before this. I don't have a problem with him releasing Valigarmunda or kidnapping Wuk Lamat and trying to kill her. The pressure he felt as the rite went on probably made him more and more frustrated, seeing all the others making progress when he wasn't, pushing him to take more risks and do more extreme things. And I think that was a great point about Bakool Ja Ja, but I just wish they would have shown him at least hesitating before doing those terrible things. Like at least having some kind of inner dialogue where he thinks, I have to do this for my brothers and sisters, or what would everyone say if I came back empty-handed? But instead we only saw him being pure evil without any sort of explanation to why. Okay, I double checked and he does mention once that if he becomes king, then it would please his mother and father, and he would let his people live in the capital.
オイラたちはただ、相当こそが優れた種だって証明するだけさ。そうなれば、父上と母上は喜ぶだろうぜ。うん。それにオイラたちが王様になれば、劣等種どもを追い出して、血族みんなでトライオラで暮らすことができる。
So that does make things a little better, I guess. But when I heard him say that for the first time, I didn't even realize the meaning behind those words at all, and just thought he wanted to make the Mamuls the supreme race and have them take over everything. Also, when he becomes a good guy, it happens way too fast and just feels kind of odd. I really think they were so close to having a great villain turn good guy, but it was just missing a little more explanation and a better build-up. And we do eventually find the Golden City, or well, the door to the Golden City at least, and I'm pretty sure it was here when we have a vision from the Echo showing us Kryle's parents, bringing her over to the source, which added a lot of mystery to the story. What exactly was on the other side of that door? Where did Kryle come from? It was safe to say that finding the Golden City left me with more questions than answers, and it just looked really cool, with the archaic engravings on the walls and the whole room that looked like it was glitched into existence. Adding on to that, we got the cutscene where Tankwa got jumped outside his house, and after Wuk Lamat got crowned the new Dawn servant and things settled down, I was expecting us to go figure out how to open that door to the Golden City. But instead, we go to Shaolani, Erinville, and explore the desert. And this had me a little confused for a time, as it felt like we went backwards, and all the tension that had been built up was kind of thrown aside for what felt like a filler episode of Naruto. Now, I had no problem with the story or the zone itself. Like I said, all the zones were beautiful and very fun to explore. It was just the timing of that chapter in the story was weird. I sort of have a suspicion that the fact that Jaolani felt so weird was because of this event. Just as I was starting to get a little frustrated, questioning what the hell we were doing here, the dome appears, and everything changes. The dome, the attack on Tuliolal, and Zoraal Ja killing his father had me in shock the entire time. I really want to give this entire segment big praise because I was hooked after that. I needed to know what was going on. That said, during the scene where Zoraal Ja was fighting his father, in the back of my head I felt like we had plenty of opportunity to interfere as the warrior of light and being as strong as we are. I get that during the first part of the fight, Bakool Ja Ja specifically didn't want us to interfere, but after Zoraal Ja revived himself and went berserk, I feel that someone could have done something to stop it and felt like we all just let Bakool Ja Ja die unfairly. But there could be many reasons for this. One being, after seeing Zoraal Ja getting revived, everyone must have been very confused, and he used the confusion to deal the killing blow, while everyone was still trying to process what happened. Overall, a very minor complaint I had with that scene. Other than that one thing, I really enjoyed it, and all the emotional scenes hit very hard.
ねえ、君たち誰か探してるの?
After doing Vanguard and going into the dome for the first time, I was surrounded by scenery that I could never have thought of in a million years. Now, everything beyond this point in the story was also really interesting and got me thinking really hard about it, trying to make sense of it in my head, because the lore gets really deep very fast. When you first arrive there and meet Sphene for the first time, and she introduces herself and tells you that Zoraal Ja has become the king of reason, and you realize that 30 years have passed. She shows you the outskirts and tells you about Alexandria, the regulator, souls and memory, beast souls, and the mysterious cloud where the dead go to live forever. It was all so much information being thrown at me at once, and I loved it. The history of Alexandria and how it came to ruin after Lindblom created a massive weapon that triggered the second calamity, which I figured out later that, according to the wiki at least, the second calamity, or the calamity of lightning, happened in the 12th reflection, so we know that Alexandria existed there. Also the regulators, how they erased the memory of anyone who died and allowed the people there to not worry about death anymore. This mysterious new material called electrope that could be seen everywhere, and the eerie feeling that something was not quite right. Everything about it and how it all came together was just absolute peak, and in terms of world building, it was all I could have asked for and more.
すごすぎるぜ。
When I first got into the city, I probably spent around 1 or 2 hours just running around and exploring everything, talking to the NPCs and going into every shop and building that I could, because I really fucking love this place. It is unlike any city we have gotten in the entire game so far. I am a big fan of cyberpunk aesthetics, and Solution 9 really nails it down. If anything, you kind of don't feel like you're playing Final Fantasy when you're there, because it is just that different. Especially after you finish the story and the Arcadian lights up and the fans start spinning, making it look like a graphics card from 100 years in the future, is really cool. Also, something that is worthy of mentioning are the apartment buildings that have a couple of rooms where you can go into. I imagine this will be a great spot for hanging out and especially role-playing, and I can appreciate when developers put in little things like that maybe not everyone will see or use, but those who do will appreciate it just that much more. Overall, amazing city, and I will be spending a lot of time here and be taking many pictures. Thank you, Square. While exploring Solution 9 with Wuk Lamat, we come across a baby Mamook, which we later found out is Zoraal Ja's son, which he rejected and cast out. When we follow him, we find that he had been living in the ruins of Alexandria by himself, somehow getting by with the help of locals that give him food and make sure he's doing alright. But when we confront him in his home, or I guess the place he likes to hang out, we meet Otis. who has been Galul Ja's parent in a way, teaching him how to read and speak, cooking for him, and protecting him. And right off the bat, it's hard for anyone to dislike this guy because he is just the most lovable robot I have ever seen. When Otis tells us his backstory, we find out that he was one of the people that offered themselves as a test subject for the technology that would eventually create the Endless. But he was only a prototype and not actually an Endless. His soul had just been moved in its entirety to the robot, and if the robot got destroyed, his soul would also vanish along with it. While an Endless is created from memories and can just be reborn or remade if the body gets destroyed. Sorry for going on a bit of a nerd tangent there, I'm just very into this whole thing. I wanted to say that Galul Ja, in my opinion, was a pretty good character. All in all, he didn't have a lot of depth to him, but then again, he was introduced pretty late in the story, and I think he contributed just enough to the story to make a good difference, but also not too much of a difference. I'm glad they didn't start revolving the story around Galul Ja too much, because I was too invested in the whole Sphene thing with the Endless and the interdimensional travel. And having Galul Ja there when Zoraal Ja died did add a lot more emotion to that scene that I can appreciate. I think that Galul Ja will probably be a more prominent character in the post-story patches, because I imagine Heritage Found and Living Memory will also develop in the post-patches, and as Galul Ja has become the new king of Alexandria, he will probably be appearing more in the story. Now back to Otis. I'm a little mad at how they killed him, because it just didn't make much sense to me, and he should have lived. I have one explanation for why he did what he did, but let me save it so we can end this on a good note. So when Zoraal Ja says fuck it and starts killing all the Alexandrians, we are running around trying to save people and get attacked by this big monster, right? And Sphene is also there and saves Otis from his rampage, which works, and he helps us fight the monster. Then the monster starts throwing around these big lightning attacks, and Sphene looks like she might get hit, so Otis rushes to her side and takes all the hits for her. Well, in a scene right before that, Zoraal Ja hits Sphene, killing her, and we realize that she can't die because she's an Endless. She can just take over another robot and be remade. And Otis knew she was an Endless, so there was no real reason to protect Sphene at that moment, because if she died, she could have just teleported away. So when Otis stood there and shielded her at the cost of his life, I couldn't even be sad, because it was just so silly, and I was more angry about it than anything. The only explanation I have for this is that Otis had trauma. We see this when he is doing the play in Living Memory, when he freezes and has flashbacks of when he couldn't protect the queen before. So Robot Otis in that scenario saw the queen was in danger, and without thinking logically, rushed to her side, because to him that was his moment to do what he failed to do before, and this time he would succeed. Even then, it still leaves a bitter taste in my mouth, because Sphene was never in any real danger.
全力で来い。そして俺にひれ伏すがいい。
Zoraal Ja was a villain that I actually really liked. I can hear you gasping over there because I know some people really didn't like him. So let me explain. First really good thing about him is that the Japanese voice for him is just so sexy. Like, holy! Daisuke Ono is just so amazing.
お前が頭振りだな。
Probably most notable for his role as Erwin Smith from Attack on Titan. And Jotaro Kujo from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
やれやれだぜ。
Throughout the first half, he had this sort of eerie aura around him. His plans for when he became king was to go to war and expand their territories in order to teach the people of Tyrol about the miseries of war. He wanted to help his people by hurting them. And when we tell him how that ended for the Garlean Empire, for example, he just shuns it off and says that he isn't like the Garleans and that they were idiots. His motivation is fine, but I'm confused as to where he got it from. Supposedly he was raised by Galul Ja Ja, who would never even suggest something like that, let alone raises children to have those kind of ideas. So my best guess is that Zoraal Ja was just so desperate to prove himself as a strong warrior that would surpass his father that he somehow convinced himself that winning a war would prove that to everyone. And maybe it would. And Zoraal Ja's only motive throughout the story, and the main thing that drives him forward, is that his whole life he was told that he was the miracle child, that he was the greatest warrior in all of Tyrol, and he would carry on his father's legacy. And it must have been a tremendous burden on his shoulder to live up to that. And he gets stuck in this spiral of self-doubt, that he's not good enough, that he needs to prove to everyone that he is the best. That's why he is so obsessed over challenging Wuk Lamat Lamat because she succeeded in beating Bakool Ja Ja's shadow where he failed. After that, in his mind, he wasn't the strongest anymore, and he would do anything to prove that he was, obsessing over it until he became someone completely different, and he realizes that he has gone too far, but he can't stop now. And all that tension between him and Wuk Lamat reaches its climax when we fight him in one of the best trials I've seen so far in the game. It was kind of like when we faced off against Gaius in the Ultima fight to decide who is stronger in a fight to the death, and a part of me believes that Zoraal Ja knew he would lose that fight. He just wanted someone to end his descent into madness for him, and the scene where Bakool Ja talks to him as he's dying had me in tears, by the way. I liked Sphene because she was an interesting antagonist. There are very obvious similarities between Sphene and the Ascians, or Emet-Selch particularly, but her story and motives were nevertheless good, and she was someone you could really empathize with. The only problem I noticed about her was that from the start it was pretty obvious she would become an enemy, or at least pretty early on after we first meet her, and it wasn't really hard to guess what was going to happen in the end. There were, of course, some things I could not have predicted, like the fact that she was an Endless, or the thing where she was just a program thingy created by the team of Alexandrian scientists that were researching interdimensional travel in the past. What were they called? Preservation, I think? I'm terrible with names. And the main thing I liked about her was her story. How she tried to protect her people when their world got destroyed by the calamity, but she died during the chaos and was later remade from memories. That she formed an alliance with Zoraal Ja in order to get more souls made me ask myself why at the beginning, why she was so desperate for souls when at the time I thought they were only used for the regulators to revive people. But later found out that there were countless Endless that she needed huge quantities of souls to maintain, and that she was programmed to do whatever it took to protect her people, because that's what the memories she was made of were telling her to do. She wasn't as much of a badass as Emet-Selch for sure, God bless that man. Mwah. And her character wasn't as complicated to figure out. As I understood it, she was a queen that loved and was loved by her people, and her number one motive was protecting them, but that meant sacrificing others to do so. There was no other way to solve it, even if she wanted to. It was either her people or our people. What really carried her was the world building. The story of Alexandria was especially interesting, and you even got to experience it in Alexandria, the dungeon, and just the concept of living memory in general made the last encounter really epic. She also had great voice acting, and I remember there was a scene where you could really hear her voice shaking. If I can find it, I will put it in now.
そうして世界を喰らう最悪のシステムとなってアレクサンドリアを守るんだ。お互いの守りたいものが相入れないとき、どうやって解決すべきか君ならきっとわかるよね。邪魔はさせません。消えてください。さようなら。
Speaking of the last encounter, this fight might have one of my favorite BGMs, at least in recent memory. As expected, but Sulcan does not disappoint. Especially after the second phase begins, there is a short segment of the BGM where you have the violin playing, and I get shivers every time I hear it. The fight itself was also just masterful. It was pretty damn lengthy, which I like. The mechanics are interesting and fun to do, not to mention the difficulty itself is pretty damn hard. I've run this a couple of times, and every time I do, there are tons of people that die, myself included. It's just a shame that there isn't an extreme for this out already, because it is going to be so fun to do. There is, however, one thing about this fight that I think ruined my mood a little when I first saw it, and I know that you know what I'm I'm talking about. It is, of course, when Wuk Lamat breaks through the barrier and uses her talk no jutsu on Sphene. Maybe some people were fine with this, but it really grinded my gears when it happened, because after Wuk Lamat takes over, the mechanics get super simplified, and she basically does all the work while we stand behind her and let her take the spotlight. I will get into Wuk Lamat later, but I generally didn't have a problem with her taking the spotlight as much as she did, but her taking the spotlight in that fight was just one step too far in my opinion. I was really hoping for a moment where me, the Warrior of Light, and the other warriors I summoned could have an epic one-on-one fight with this amazing last boss and be the hero of the story, at least for this one last part. And I feel like it's such a shame because I was having the time of my life until that point. Thankfully, it didn't last too long, and the ending scene afterwards was really beautiful, where we promised that we would take care of Sphene's people and get to send her off with a smile was both sad and heartwarming. Now to get into the uglier side of the expansion, and I bet you have heard this from other creators as well, but aside from a couple of Scions, they barely got any screen time during this whole expansion. Especially Estinian and Yerstola only got like a couple of minutes at most. Even Thancred and Urianger, who got at least more screen time with Koana, didn't really get any memorable moments. When they told us that we were going to be rivals during the Rite of Succession, I was expecting to maybe get to fight them or have them expand upon that rivalry a little more, but we ended up working together most of the time, which I thought was also fine because I really just enjoy interacting with the Scions, but they had so many opportunities to make something more interesting from that. And for me, the Scions are a big part of why I love the story of this game so much, and I was really excited to go on adventures with them again, after seeing them all in the trailers and promotions before the expansion, but we barely got any of that. Instead, they kind of came across more like side characters the whole time, or added fan service, because Square felt like they had to include the Scions, because they know that everyone likes them so much. The same can be said about your player. You definitely don't play nearly as big of a role in the story as you would expect. You're there more as a supporting character for Wuk Lamat throughout her journey. Now, I'm still not sure how to feel about this, because I usually just like to do the story and try to enjoy it as much as I can. The things I enjoy about the story is the characters, the adventures, lore, and world building, and having everything revolve around my character or not doesn't really bother me too much, as I don't mind just going along for the ride. But I can see why some people dislike that part. And to be fair, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't like my spotlight being stolen during the last boss fight. So I think they could have done better in regards to your role in the story as well as the Scion's role in the story. Especially Krile and Erinwell, who I thought would be way more prevalent in the story than they turned out to be. Don't get me wrong, they got their moments, but those moments were few and far between. I saved the best for last, as I want to talk about the main character this expansion, Wuk Lamat. Before I begin, I want to say that I think she gets way more hate than she deserves, with people saying that Lise had better character growth than her, which I just don't agree with. But of course, those people are more than entitled to their opinion, and some make very valid arguments about her that I agree with. Also, a lot of people have mentioned that her English VA was apparently terrible, so I tried listening to a few scenes of her voice in English, and while admittedly it wasn't anything amazing, I think it wasn't nearly as bad as the impression I got from others. I can at least say that I really enjoyed her voice acting in Japanese throughout the entire story. Ayaka Shimoyamada, while not one of the biggest names in the industry, went above and beyond for Wuk Lamat. I can maybe give you a little comparison between the two, so you can tell me what you think in the comments.
旅に出るまで私は知らなかった。それぞれの部族が今日まで大切に受け継いできた文化を、歴史を、願いを、この町で暮らしてるだけでトライオラの全てを知った気になってたんだ。親父、親父。
Growing up in this city, I used to think I knew all there was to know about Tulihyolal. But my journey showed me how much I had yet to learn about the cultures, histories, and aspirations of this nation.
Now, as to how much screen time she got, it wasn't something I really thought about until after I finished the story and heard a bunch of other people mentioning it, that I finally thought, oh yeah, she did have a lot of screen time, didn't she? So as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't something that bothered me personally. But it is nevertheless a fact that Wuk Lamat had an incredible amount of screen time and focus in the story. What bothered me, however, was the fact that oftentimes her writing became extremely repetitive and honestly annoying at times. There was this reoccurring pattern in every place where we went, where we arrived, and Wuk Lamat says, I have to get to know everyone. Then we run around and talk to the locals, which I believe has become somewhat of a meme at this point. She also kept repeating the line, I want to protect everyone's smile, over and over and over again. In terms of her growth as a character, I at least thought it was very good. In the beginning, she was naive, weak, scared, and unfit to be a ruler of a nation. Definitely. But at the end, I felt like she had shaped up to be a pretty reliable person that understood things like that sometimes you need to go to war. She could also hold her own in a fight, like we saw with Bakool Ja Ja and in the Intervos, as much as I dislike that part. And I think that we will see her grow even more in future patches and expansions, if Square decides to keep her around after everyone's feedback on her recently. I think that Wuk Lamat was a great character, with great character growth, but she just had too much screen time that could and should have been used for other important characters. And I think the real problem was the repetitiveness of the quests and the repetitiveness of some lines in her writing. Lack of fun interactive elements like more solo instances or minigames that made the questing feel dragged out, and also pacing issues with the story that made her look worse than she actually was. To summarize, I want to list all the pros and cons I can think of, totally not a stolen idea from the Lazy Peon. Some of these might be things I perhaps didn't talk about, but still wanted to mention nevertheless. And at the end, I will be giving Dawntrail my official rating. So, starting off with the pros, Dawntrail had amazing new zones and cities that were honestly fun to explore. It had an amazing soundtrack that blew me away many times. Aetheryte unlock quests were connected with each other in an interesting way. The quantity of side quests has gone down, but I feel like the quality has improved, with most of them having interesting plots around them, especially living memory side quests. There were interesting tribes and cultures that I can't wait to do society quests for. The lore and overall story was really well built and interesting to think about and learn about. This expansion had great world building with a lot of cool sci-fi elements like the regulators and Solution 9 and all that. In terms of voice acting, I thought it was great. I have absolutely no complaints, at least for the Japanese voices. Aside from a few bugs, the graphics update was also a very nice addition. The expansion had many new quality of life elements that make life easier, like the new blocking system and muting system and the blacklist. There weren't many, but Dawntrail also had these new point-and-click quests that I thought were pretty interesting, and I want to see them expand on. The quality and difficulty of dungeons and trials was unlike anything I've seen before, at least in terms of story content, and I feel like they've just made it slightly more difficult and the timing of things slightly faster, and it really shows, as well as the mechanics themselves just being more interesting and fun to do. Dawntrail had good villains, although not perfect. I thought they were interesting and at least had some depth to them. Of course, there was Zoraal Ja, who had a very sexy voice and was also my favorite villain, so I'm putting him in here. The event where the lightning dome appeared and the subsequent attack on Tulihyolal hooked me back into the story for the entire rest of the MSQ. Now, getting into the cons, the expansion had a slow start, which was arguably a necessary step. I don't know, but I still count it as a con. The story had weird pacing at times, like I explained with Shaloani. Wuk Lamat had way too much screen time and focus that should have been used for other characters. The writing feeling repetitive with certain characters. This is mostly in regards to Wuk Lamat, but also sometimes with Kryl. She kept talking about how she's able to fight now, and it kind of became her personality for a little bit. The main story quests being repetitive, like I mentioned with the Talk to Locals quests. The main story had, I felt, a lack of fun gameplay elements, like solo instances and minigames. Living memory staying in the destroyed state was also a con. I don't know why they did this. I am hopeful that it will not stay like this for too long. The Warrior of Light and Scions, especially Kryl and Erinville, barely got any cool moments, which was a shame. Wuk Lamat stealing the spotlight during the intervos. Yes, I am still mad about this. And the death of Otis being the way that it was didn't really make sense. There was a slight lack of character consistency in regards to Bakool Ja Ja, and his turnaround was way too fast, I feel like. The character Sphene being a little predictable and easy to read. And lastly, Bakool Ja Ja's death feeling like it could have easily been prevented. But other than that, I want to give this my official rating, which will be 8.2 out of 10. So take that however you wish. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to support me, I would greatly appreciate a like and a subscribe. I am but a small YouTuber trying to make a name for myself. But other than that, have a great day and stay safe out there. And watch out for any blue-scaled lizards that wield 2 swords, because they might be evil.
よく見ろ、ウクラマト。